the Mars Society, well known to many in the room, and that's Bob Zubrin. Bob, welcome.
Phil, are we going to be able to project my charts? Or oh, there we are. Okay, thanks. Mr. Augustine, members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for inviting me here to express my views and insights and those of the Mars Society on where the American space program should be going, and to thank you for coming out of your private pursuits to do this activity, because I think this is a very important activity that you're engaged in here. I hope you'll forgive me if I just take a few seconds to present my credentials, since some people here might not be familiar with me. I'm an engineer with a master's in aeronautics and astronautics and a doctorate in nuclear engineering. I have over 2 decades of aerospace industry experience, including 7 years at Martin Marietta, Denver, and Lockheed Martin, doing preliminary design of interplanetary missions. And I also, for a number of years, have run my own company, Pioneer Astronautics, which has done around successfully about 40 NASA contracts of various sorts. Written over 200 publications, including 9 patents and 8 books, 5 of which are in this field. And I also lead the Mars Society, international organization of people committing to furthering the exploration of Mars, which has done various things, the most notable of which has been to establish a simulated human Mars exploration station in the high Arctic on Devon Island, in the polar desert, 900 miles from the North Pole. Okay. My remarks today are going to cover a number of areas. First of all, why NASA needs a definitive goal with a definitive schedule. What that goal needs to be, and how it can be accomplished in that kind of way. So, to begin, in recent years, and in fact, it's now rolling into decades, people have been concerned, politicians, congressmen, journalists, why are we stuck in Earth orbit? Why have we not gone anywhere since the conclusion of the Apollo program? And it's a very valid concern, and it needs to be addressed. And I think it can be addressed if you look at how NASA has actually operated over its history. It's operated in 2 fundamentally different modes of operation, one of which is that which prevailed in the Apollo era from 61 to about 73, and I call that the Apollo mode. And the other, which has prevailed since, which therefore I call the shuttle era mode, or shuttle mode for shorthand. Okay? Now, there's 2 completely different styles of operation that were engaged in these 2 periods. In the Apollo mode, what's done is national leadership sets a definitive goal with a definitive schedule. NASA is assigned to figure out how to do it on that schedule. A mission is designed. Components are designed to fulfill that mission. They are built, and the mission is flown. 1, 2, 3, by the numbers. That's how we got to the moon. In the shuttle mode, on the other hand, okay, what happens is programs are proposed by various constituencies, whether constituencies in the technical community, from various NASA centers, from various states or other interests, and some of these make it through the political system, and we get an assortment of technical programs undertaken which are not really coordinated with each other, and which are subsequently justified by a rationale which is produced to be able to claim that these programs would be useful at some point in the future when someone actually had a mission to go somewhere. Okay? If you want to use a metaphor to compare these 2 modes of operation, think of 2 couples, each of which would like to have their dream house. Couple A talk about their dream house, and then they hire an architect to design the dream house, and they get the drawing done, and then they go to a contractor, they build the house, and they have their house. Couple B goes out every weekend and cruises garage sales and sees items that they think might be of interest at some point in the future when they want to build a house. So they pick up a spiral staircase, some Doric columns, aluminum siding, whatever, and they pile it up in the backyard. And then every once in a while when the in-laws come to visit and pa-in-law says, why do you have all this junk piled in your backyard? They say, well, it's to build a house. And he says, well, I'd like to see the plans of this house. So they hire an architect and they tell him, look, we want you to design a house and it has to include all of these parts. Okay? So the house is never built, but embarrassment is avoided because a rationale is produced for the various purchases. And so that is the difference of the two modes of operation. And it is apparent which one is going to be more productive, and the numbers show it. You know, if you take NASA's budget from 1961 to 1973 and you add it up in today's dollars, it's around $230 billion. Divide that by 13, it's $18 billion a year, which is the same as NASA's budget this year. That is, during the Apollo period, while there was, like 1966, it was more, and other years it was less, on average, NASA's budget over that period was the same, within a few percent of what it is this year or last year, and frankly, the same in general order of what it's been since 1990. So let's compare what NASA accomplished with that budget between 61 and 73 compared to what it accomplished with the same budget between 1997 and today. Okay? Between 1961 and 1973, NASA built and flew Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab, okay, Ranger, Surveyor, Mariner. We did all the technology needed to development to do Pioneer, Viking, Voyager. Over 30 lunar and planetary missions in that list. We did technology development of an amazing sort. We developed hydrogen, oxygen rocket engines, multi-stage heavy lift launch vehicles, in-space life support, space suits, deep space navigation techniques, deep space communication techniques, space rendezvous techniques, lunar landing techniques, re-entry techniques, nuclear rocket engines, space nuclear reactors, radioisotope thermoelectric generators. The list goes on. The entire bag of tricks that we use to do everything that we do in space was developed. And we developed a deep space tracking network, and we built Cape Canaveral and Johnson Space Center and Jet Propulsion Lab, the works, and we inspired a generation of youth to want to enter science, a point that I'll get to again later. By comparison, with the same budget between 1997 and 2009, NASA flew 47 shuttle missions, which allowed them to repair and upgrade the Hubble Space Telescope and partially build a space station. And we flew about a dozen lunar and planetary probes, and we did no significant technology development to speak of. So comparing these two records of accomplishment over identical periods with identical budgets, it is difficult to come to any other conclusion that the degree of accomplishment that one can get using the Apollo mode of operation is at least in order of magnitude more effective than can be done with the shuttle mode of let's just work on technologies and do projects that are interesting and potentially valuable, and someday we'll have the set of tools we need to go, as Mr. O'Keefe put it, anywhere, anytime. Okay. The first program works, the second essentially does not. So, in short, we really need to take stock. This idea of having an unfocused program is simply unworkable if you want to have an efficient program. We need to take stock, decide what our goals really are, and allocate our priorities in accord with those goals. Okay. Should we continue flying the shuttle? Well, if our goal is to continue ferrying people up and down to Earth orbit, as this is what we think our primary activity in space should be, then that is worth considering. But if our goal is, in fact, to send humans to the moon or Mars or wherever beyond low Earth orbit, then we have to allocate our priorities and allocate our funds to support those objectives if we wish to accomplish them. And we have to set a definitive schedule to achieve those objectives. Okay? The Apollo mode got us to the moon. It could get us to Mars if we choose. The shuttle mode will never get us anywhere. What's needed, though, to set a goal, set a schedule, and accomplish the project is leadership. In the beginning was the word. Now, what should the goal be? In my view, the goal needs to be humans to Mars within a decade. Okay? Why Mars? Okay? Because of all planetary destinations within reach, Mars is by far the most important, offers the most, both scientifically, in terms of social benefits for our nation of if we do accept this challenge, and in terms of what it portends for the future. In terms of science, okay, Mars is the Rosetta Stone for letting us know the truth about the prevalence and potential diversity of life in the universe. Okay. We now know that Mars had liquid water on its surface, including standing bodies of water of various kinds, for a period on the order of 1 billion years, which is 5 times as long as it took life to appear on Earth after there was liquid water here. So if the theory is correct that life is a natural development from chemistry through chemical complexification, wherever you have an aqueous environment and reasonable temperatures and an assortment of various minerals and so forth present, then life should have appeared on Earth, on Mars, as it did on Earth. And if we can go to Mars and find fossils of past life on the surface, then we will have proven this conjecture, and we will know that life is a general phenomenon. And since we now know that planets around stars are a general phenomenon, we've detected over 200 extrasolar planetary systems. It now appears that planets around other stars are more the rule than the exception. Since every star has an appropriate distance, near or far, depending upon the brightness of the star, where you have acceptable temperatures for liquid water, if life develops with reasonable probability wherever it has planets within this range, then life is everywhere. We're living in an inhabited universe. This is worth finding out. Okay? Furthermore, if we can send astronauts to Mars and drill down into the subsurface where there is almost certainly liquid water underground on Mars, okay, we know that because we've now seen a runoff, a transient runoff of water occurred during the lifetime of MGS from the side of a crater, which means there had to be a reservoir there. We're seeing methane vents coming out from Mars, which means at a minimum there has to be hydrothermal activity underground on Mars. Okay, if we can drill and reach that groundwater and bring it up and see if there is life in the water, because if there is life living on Mars today, that's where it is to be found, in liquid water. Okay, and we could examine that life. We could find out if it has the same chemical structure. All life on Earth has the same biochemistry, all these RNA and DNA and the amino acids of the same group. And does life on Mars replicate that pattern? In other words, is life on Earth the pattern for all life everywhere? Or are we just one particular example drawn from a much vaster tapestry of possibilities? This is worth finding out. This is something that thinking men and women have wondered about for thousands of years. There is no comparable science to be done on the moon. Okay? You can go to the moon, you can date the craters, and you'll know that Aristarchus is this old, and this is when this meteor landed, and that is when that meteor landed, and somebody can get a paper published in the Journal of Geophysical Research out of that, but that is not something that changes humanity's worldview. This does. Okay? So Mars is vastly more important scientifically than the moon or other alternative destinations that are actually within reach of the human spaceflight program. Secondly, the challenge. I believe that civilizations are like individuals. We thrive when we're challenged. We stagnate when we are not. And a Humans to Mars program would be a tremendous bracing challenge for our society, and particularly for our youth. Okay? It would say to every young person in this country, learn your science and you can be part of pioneering new worlds. And out of that challenge, we would get millions of scientists, engineers, inventors, technological entrepreneurs, medical researchers, doctors, people who add to our military strength, our industrial strength, our social progress, advance our society in every capacity. And this is really worth adding emphasis to. You know, the Apollo program doubled the number of science graduates in this country at every level, high school, college, PhD. And we're still benefiting from that today, okay? Because, you know, these 40-something technological entrepreneurs who built Silicon Valley in the 1990s, these were the 12-year-old little boy scientists of the 1960s who got into science because they were mad for space, because of what was going on. And now in this day and age, a Humans to Mars program would have an even greater social impact because the science and engineering professions are open to women today in a way that was simply not the case in the 1960s. So in addition to millions of little boy scientists, we're getting millions of little girl scientists. And these people would be making their contributions that add to our economic progress, our medical progress, our military strength for decades to come in a way that totally dwarfs the expenditure. But you have to challenge them. You're not going to challenge the youth of today with the idea of replicating the technological feats of their grandparents' generation. Okay? Youth loves adventure. We invite them to adventure. We raise their morale. We can address this problem. And then finally, there is the issue of the future. Okay? Mars has the resources to support life. Therefore, it also has the resources to potentially support civilization in a way that the moon simply does not. Mars has liquid water on it. We've now imaged places on Mars, continent-sized regions that are 60% water by weight in the soil. That compares to the moon where people are talking about parts per million or maybe higher concentrations at 40 Kelvin in shadowed poles. There's carbon on Mars. There's virtually no carbon on the moon. We're a carbon-based life form. Everything we eat, everything we wear, whether it's natural or synthetic fibers, is made from carbon. Okay, this is made from carbon. Our fuels are made from carbon. We need carbon. We have nitrogen on Mars. It's the minority constituent of the Martian atmosphere. Okay, nitrogen's absent on the moon. Another element fundamental for life. And Mars has had a complex geologic history that has created mineral ore that can concentrate geochemically rare elements. You know, human beings have used copper since Egyptian times, but copper is actually a very rare element on Earth in terms of percent of the crust. It is, though, accessible because there are geological processes that concentrate it. The moon has not had these sorts of geological processes. Mars had, and that makes available ore. It also has a 24-hour day, which is what is appropriate for growing plants in greenhouses. It has an atmosphere which is thick enough to basically mask out solar flare, so it can use thin-walled greenhouses on Mars instead of thick-walled greenhouses, which is what would be needed on the moon, assuming you had plants that could accept the 2-week light-dark cycle. So you can do agriculture on the Mars in a way that's simply not possible on the moon. So one could go on, but in short, for the coming age of exploration, Mars compares to the moon as North America compared to Greenland in the previous age of exploration. Greenland was closer to Europe. Europeans reached it first, but it was ultimately too barren an environment in which a new branch of human civilization could be established. In contrast, North America is one in which one could be established and flourish. So if we're talking about going into space to stay, if we're talking about sustainability, you want to go to where the resources are, okay? The contrast that is sometimes drawn between Mars as the flag and footprints place and Moon as the place where you go to stay is exactly the reverse. Okay, a Moon base would have much greater logistic requirements than a Mars base because on Mars, you don't have to ship your water to Mars. The water is there. The carbon is there. It's all there. And if we can make use of the resources, we can establish ourselves there. And if we can establish ourselves there, if we, in our time, can do what we can do, which is establish that first little tiny human foothold on Mars, then we'll put our stamp on the future because hundreds of years from now, there will be human civilization on Mars. And when they look back at this time, there'll be nothing that anyone is doing in this period in history that they will consider more significant than what we did to make them possible. Okay? You know, 1492, you ask any American what happened in 1492, they'll say Christopher Columbus set sail. But in 1492, England and France signed a peace treaty. The Borgias took over the papacy. Lorenzo de' Medici died. To people into current events, those might have seemed more important, but to us today, it's Columbus's voyage that stands as the important event. Similarly, this. Now, I said humans to Mars in a decade. How is that possible? Okay, I mean, various mission architectures that you've seen undoubtedly make it seem like a very futuristic proposition, but it is not. Okay, and now I'm going to walk you through how this can actually be done in brief. Unfortunately, not in as much detail as I'd like, but I've written a book on the subject, and the details are all there. May you have the next chart. Okay, first of all, how long does it take to get to Mars? It's the same question as how much rope does it take to connect two posts that are 10 meters apart. In principle, it can take any amount, okay? But it can be done with 10 meters if you pull it tight. And the thing that pulls it tight is the schedule, okay? The thing that made Apollo work was the schedule. Kennedy said we had to be on the moon by the end of the decade. Had he not done that, the program would have failed because there were any number of factions with all sorts of other projects that they would like to do, space stations, Saturn IXs, nuclear rockets, who were willing to say, well, you can't do your program until you do my program. But at a certain point, they were squeezed out of the picture when the rope was pulled tight because people finally said, look, do we really want to go to the moon or don't we? And that's how this happened. Okay, but the issue is whether you want to collect the posts or whether you want to sell rope. So let's look at a couple of rope sales. Next chart. Okay, of course, there's the lunar base, the lunar toll booth. Okay, the previous administration, in announcing the vision, President Bush said, we got to go to the moon because you can launch from the moon easier from the Earth, and indeed you can. But before you launch a spacecraft from the moon, you have to get to the moon, and the delta V required to go from low Earth orbit to the lunar surface is actually greater than that to go from low Earth orbit to the surface of Mars. So even if there was a lunar Cape Canaveral in place right now, and they were making propellant and giving it away for free to anyone who would stop by, it still would not make any sense to go to the moon. Okay, the next chart. Okay, then there's this one. Okay, there's the Advanced Propulsion Crowd. You have to build our giant spaceship. Here's one that was designed under the Prometheus program. You can see it's quite large. Mars is there for scale. And they had all kinds of fantastical assumptions about it, but in fact, A, it isn't necessary to go to Mars, and B, if you actually do the mission analysis using real numbers, you find out it offered no mission advantages at all. Next chart. Now, this is one we commonly hear today, that you can train for Mars on the moon. And certainly you can train for Mars on the moon, but you can do it in the Arctic at 3 orders of magnitude lower cost. And this, by the way, is a photograph of the Mars Society's base on Devon Island on the rim of a 20-kilometer diameter impact crater in the middle of a polar desert. And we just had a 1-month mission there. It cost us $75,000. If you want to do it at higher fidelity, you could up the budget in order of magnitude, and it'd be $750,000. It would still be a trivial percentage of the cost of doing practice exercises on the moon, and we can initiate such activities today, not waiting until 2019 or something like that. Okay, so that justification isn't there. But that leaves the question, how do we actually do a human Mars mission? Next chart. Okay, well, any mission requires an appropriate launch vehicle. And by the way, I'm showing you charts now that were actually developed when we designed this mission, which is known as the Mars Direct Plan, which was designed at Martin Marietta back in 1990. And as you know, Mr. Augustine, one of the great benefits of working at the Martin Company is when you leave, they let you keep your charts. So here, this is a heavy lift vehicle, in this case shuttle-derived, 4 SSMEs, 2 solids, ET core, and a hydrogen-oxygen upper stage. And I hope I won't disappoint you too much if I don't give you an extended pitch on why this launch vehicle is better than various other launch vehicles that have been shown to you, like the Ares 5 or the direct vehicle. Frankly, any of them will work. Any heavy lift launch vehicle with an upper stage to do a large-scale injection on Trans-Mars will suffice. What won't work, however, is not having a heavy lift launch vehicle. And this is a subject that, I think is very much before you right now. Some people want to abandon the goal of heavy lift. If you, look, we cut the contract on the Saturn V in 1962. We flew it in 1966. We were on the moon 3 years later. If we had a heavy lift launch vehicle today, we could be on the moon within 4 years easily. And the reason why we haven't gone anywhere since the mid-'70s in space is primarily due to the fact that we haven't had a heavy lift. Okay, any number of people, including me, have designed various plans or attempted to go to the moon or asteroids or Mars or wherever with multiple launches of medium lift launch vehicles, and the plan always completely breaks down because you have to launch 4 or 6 or whatever medium lift vehicles, not only successfully but on schedule, and you get ridiculously low mission reliability figures, and the plan becomes unacceptable. But if we have heavy lift, we can do this. And that's what this does. This vehicle, as designed, could lift 120 tons to LEO, but more importantly, using that hydrogen-oxygen injection stage, it could throw 47 tons on a direct trajectory to Mars or 59 to the moon. And that's how we want to do the mission. Just lift and throw and let it go. Send the payload to the planet with the same upper stage of the same booster that lifted it to orbit in the first place. That's how we've done every real unmanned planetary mission. That's how we did the Apollo lunar mission. If you can do the Mars mission that way, right there, you've gone 90% of the way towards taking the Mars mission out of the world of Battlestar Galactica fantasy and putting it in our world. So what do? Next chart. Okay, this shows a mission sequence. In the first year of operation, you launch one of these boosters off the Cape, use that upper stage to throw a 40-ton payload on a minimum energy trajectory to Mars. What is that payload? Next chart. Consists of a number of things. The primary object is the Earth Return Vehicle, or ERV. Okay, this is a little rocket ship for coming back from Mars to Earth. It's got a small cabin that can house 4 astronauts on a 6-month transit from Mars to Earth. No one's in it now. Then below that are 2 methane-oxygen chemical propulsion stages, which, however, are unfueled. And then slung below the vehicle, not shown in this diagram, is a light truck, which in the back of it has a nuclear reactor, 100 kilowatt power. Okay, this thing flies to Mars, use the aerobrake to capture into Mars orbit. After we see the weather's okay, we bring it in, use the aeroshell to plow us down to subsonic speeds, pop a chute, come down soft with rockets, just like we did in Viking. Okay, so now you got this thing on the ground. Then you telerobotically drive the truck a couple of 100 yards away, deploy the reactor on the ground, turn it on. Next chart.
I hate to hurry you here, but we're getting close to time.
Okay.
This is very interesting, but we need to move on.
All right. Using very elementary chemistry, you make the propellant, okay? And this has all been demonstrated in full on Earth, actually, since the gaslight era. Next chart. Skip it. Next chart. Okay. Then at the next launch opportunity, you launch 2 more boosters off the Cape. One shoots out another Earth return vehicle. The other shoots out a HAB module with 4 astronauts in it. Next chart. Well, that shows the HAB module. Next chart. Okay, it's a basic tuna can HAB with a number of rooms and a solar flare storm shelter in the middle, which you can shield with provisions. You don't need extra mass to provide shielding. Next chart. Okay, we'll skip this. Next chart. Okay, we can make artificial gravity on the way to Mars, and this is very important so the crew's health doesn't deteriorate, and it also means that we don't need to do another 30 years of research on the space station on zero-gravity health effects on the crew, because we can avoid them through simple engineering. Next chart. Next chart. Keep going. So this is a concept of the base. You land in the immediate vicinity of the Earth return vehicle. If you land some distance away, you have a ground rover that can get you to the Earth return vehicle. You also have a backup Earth return vehicle that you can direct to the site if you do not land accurately enough to drive there. You're on the surface for a year and a half, which allows you to do substantial exploration over a period of time. At the end of that time, you get in the Earth return vehicle, you take off, you fly back to Earth. You leave your HAB on the base, on the surface, so each time you do this, you add another HAB to the Martian surface. There is nothing in this that is fundamentally beyond our technology. Let's move forward quickly through a couple of charts. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. There. Okay. Now, the moon. If you also develop lunar landing stages, you could use the same set of hardware to land on the moon, and that could be done as a tangential goal of the program. I would not recommend the moon as a precursor mission for Mars because you do have to develop lunar landing and ascent modules, which are not utilizable by the Mars mission. However, you could do a near-Earth asteroid mission as a precursor because a near-Earth asteroid mission can be done with a subset of the Mars hardware. In other words, I'm not proposing a near-Earth asteroid program. I'm proposing that you set your goal on Mars, and in the course of doing that, there are certain other activities where you exercise a subset of the Mars hardware, which gives you greater confidence and have a certain value in themselves. And a near-Earth asteroid mission could fall into this class. So there it is. The technology is there, okay, to do this. Going to Mars on an absolute scale is more difficult than going to the moon. But relative to our technology today, this is a lower order of challenge. In 1961, we didn't even know if people could eat in space, okay? And we got to the moon 8 years later. The amount of technology we have to develop to accomplish this plan is modest compared to what had to be developed to do Apollo. And for us to say today that this is beyond us, that is this beyond our capacity, our skill, or our courage, is saying that we have become less than the people that got us here, and that therefore we are going to give less to the people who will follow in our footsteps. And I would say that that is something that this country cannot afford. So we're here. I think this is potentially a great moment. It's a great moment because it's a moment in which great things are possible. You've got a new administration which is re-examining everything, an administration which is committed to audacity and hope and the fierce urgency of now. Okay? Well, and which has sufficient political support in Congress to actually implement a bold program should they decide to embrace it. The American people want and deserve a space program that is really going somewhere. By taking decisive action, by making a decisive recommendation to break us out of this stagnation that we've had in the space program for several decades, for 4 decades. 4 decades of stagnation is enough. Mr. Augustine, members of the Commission, I'm asking you to make a bold recommendation to Mr. Obama that he seize the time and move America forward in space. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Your enthusiasm is certainly not lacking, and we appreciate that and admire it. I'm afraid our time is used up, so we won't be able to ask any questions, but we'll read your book.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.